In this video, I want to talk about squatting and what goes into a good squat and how to improve your squatting. A good squat, first of all, is a squat that allows you to be in a position where your hips are flexed and knees are flexed almost completely, and your hips in particular are below the level of your knees. As well, in this position, you have good balanced distribution of weight in the feet. You're not all in your forefoot and you're not all on the outsides of your feet with your toes lifting like mine. And your spine is neutral, it's not curved, okay? So, why is that even important? Two good reasons. When you squat shallow, most of the range of motion is at the knee and not the hip. So a lot of the action or the work is being taken over by the quads, which is great. Having strong quads is important, but you may not be strengthening the other target muscle, which is the glutes. Having strong glutes allows us to protect our back from pain, our knees from pain, and make sure that we have good strength and ability to climb stairs and to walk. The other thing is we want to have functional strength. We're all here because we don't want to end up functionally incapacitated. We want to be able to get on and off the toilet. So we have to be able to squat at least to that depth. But consider that if you end up on the ground, being able to get up from the ground means having strength in a fully flexed position where your hips and knees are flexed like this. So it is important to work on squat depth. But many of us struggle with that. Here's why. Good squat mechanics require mobility in joint areas that are meant to move well, including our ankles, our hips, our pelvic hip area, and actually our thoracic spine, the spine segment where the ribs come out. And a lot of people are stiff in these areas. We're going to talk about those. The other thing is we need good stability through our low back and pelvis. Okay, so that's kind of what a lot of people talk about in terms of core control, and stability through the knees. Now, a lot of people will blame their knees for being unstable, when in reality, these stable areas are rarely the source of the problem. Consider that if they stiffen up or have pain, it's usually because there's imposed movement happening there because there isn't sufficient movement happening in the mobile areas that I described. So by liberating those areas meant for movement, we then allow for greater stability in the areas like our knees and back that are just trying to do their job, right? They're not being asked to move more or control movement, excess movement, being imposed on them by stiffness in otherwise mobile areas. So let's talk about these mobile areas and how to improve mobility in these three areas, these key areas. Ankles tend to be very stiff in many people, okay? This will limit squat depth, as you can appreciate. Improving mobility isn't about passive stretching because the body's holding tension and stiffness for the fact that it lacks trust and strength through the range of motion. So the best strategy for improving mobility in a joint is to actually do loaded range of motion, which is strength work, which is what we do in this program. We improve our ankle mobility in women who want muscle through calf raises, because in a calf raise, you're loading the ankle through flexion and then asking for extension from a lengthened position of the calf, of the foot muscles. And so doing calf raises is the number one way to improve your ankle mobility, controlling the range of motion there. Now, let's imagine that in the meantime, you want to address this stiffness. You can actually overcome your limitations at the ankle by simply raising your heels on a 2-inch riser, whether it's rubber squat wedges like these that you can buy at any store, fitness store, or simply using a piece of wood 2x4 at home. Or if you're at a gym, using a sufficiently large, like a 2-inch sized weight plate under each foot. And as you improve your ankle mobility over time, at least in the meantime, you can improve your squat depth. Right away, you'll notice a difference. Now, speaking of that upper spine, many of us are in an excessive kyphosis by virtue of how we sit, all day. We are stiff through this area. A lot of corrective strategies are available in the app in the upper cross syndrome section of the posture and mobility space. So look under the coaching resources, have a look at your posture and mobility, and inside there you can see a ton of resources meant for mobilization of this area. But one of the underestimated impacts that you can have on mobility through your spine is through breath work. And I'm going to actually add more breath work to the resources here, but just consider that being able to expand your chest cavity, your rib cage in 3 dimensions, 360-degree expansion is critical to good mobility through your spine. And also practicing some rotation and extension. So have a look at some of those resources. Now, let's talk about this area. Okay, so good lumbo-pelvic hip dynamic control comes down to having mobile hips. And if the hips are stiff, it's because maybe we're holding tension in the areas, and there are tons of muscles that attach to the pelvis and hips that would be too numerous to kind of break apart and talk about, but suffice it to say that over time, your programming across the plan in the Women Who Want Muscle training is designed to help balance the strength in all these muscles. But it's nonetheless worthwhile doing a little bit of self-awareness and seeing if you can actually address some areas of tension. So the first thing I want you to do is consider your standing posture and whether you're someone who sits in a posterior pelvic tilt or perhaps you're someone who sits in an anterior pelvic tilt. The way you're going to know this is by a few things. One, you can do an assessment of just placing your long fingers on your pubic bone and resting the base of the fleshy part of your thumb on those front pelvic bones, your ASIS. And this creates a triangle. If you're in a posterior tilt, you'll find that the triangle tips back. So the fingertips sit forward relative to the balls of your hands, okay? And if you're in an anterior tilt, it's the opposite. You'll find that the fingertips sit behind where the base of your thumbs sit, okay? You'll also notice weight distribution differences. If you're posterior tilt, you may find you just dump into your hips, you hold a lot of tension in your quads, and your weight is mostly in the balls of your feet when you stand. You probably tend to have a bit more of a rounded upper back as well. If you're in an anterior tilt, you're someone who probably sits into the sides of your feet a bit more. Your toes tend to lift very easily, okay? Especially when you squat, you are the toe lifter type people. I'm in that camp, by the way. You may have a lot of tension you do have a lot of tension in your low back, and you notice that your belly kind of sits dumped out, okay? In both cases, it's worth noting that practicing good standing posture will help. So think of a string pulling up through the crown of your head, and for people in a posterior tilt, what this will mean is kind of bringing those knees back a little bit and straightening that upper back. You don't want to stand with your knees locked out. That's not the idea, but just bringing them back to a natural position. And then for the anterior pelvic tilt folks, what this can do is kind of just remove a little bit of that excess deep back curve and flatten the belly. So thinking about your standing posture, think about where your feet feel the weight. If you're in a posterior tilt, you may find that lengthening up redistributes your weight into the back of your feet more evenly. You should have equal distribution. And if you're in an anterior tilt, the idea is to hopefully feel that you can rebalance your weight through the insides as well as the outsides of your feet. Now, the other thing I'm going to say is when you're standing, release tension in your quads and glutes. And you might not even appreciate how much you're holding on in these areas unless you first squeeze the quads and then relax them. So my friends in a posterior tilt, this is especially important for you. You may be contracting here a lot of the day. So squeeze. That means shoving your knees back for a moment, contracting the quads, and then relaxing them. And you may realize, wow, I was holding a lot of tension. Similarly, both the posterior tilt folks and the anterior tilt folks have some tension back here for two different reasons. One, in the posterior tilt, the glute max is kind of really tucked and tight and clenching. But in the anterior tilt, you probably have a lot of tightness in the back pocket muscles. Your deep hip rotators tend to be really tight if you dig in here. And you might be someone who's been told you have piriformis syndrome or sciatica. In this case, in both cases, I want you to also practice this contract but of your glutes, your back, and then relax and see if you can just relax. Because when you're standing and your weight is well distributed and your ribs are over your pelvis, you really shouldn't be requiring to contract your legs at all, or your glutes. So just periodically check in. This video is gonna get long, but I wanna guide you as to what areas you might wanna work on to manually release some tension, and what you might think about doing in place of loaded squats that are very shallow. Because let's face it, you can get really strong at the top of your squat, but if you're never getting lower, it may be worth putting that weight aside and trying to work on squat depth, even if it means, easing up on the weight. So you're gonna grab your foam roller, and I want you to roll your glutes, okay? In all cases, you're gonna get on that foam roller and just be on your side and find the tension and just breathe. This shouldn't be painful. I'm not gonna take time to really go over that too much. If you're someone in an anterior tilt, you're gonna also wanna roll the paraspinals, so the muscles on either side of the low back spine, the low spine area, one on the other. You want to do this like every day, really. But those are two areas that deserve a little bit of love, self-release some. And if you have that deep pocket, if you're in an anterior tilt, it may be even more effective to grab a ball or a manual roller and just kind of do, not standing, you're going to be face down, and just introduce a little bit of a ball work in there. So in that deep pocket. Once you've released a little bit of the tension, I want you to try the deep squat breath work. So get down in a supported position like so, feet together, knees together, and be sure not to lose your neck into your shoulders here. So you want to make sure your shoulders are down, and that you can maybe try and take some deep breaths and try and bring air into that low back. That's especially important if you're in an anterior tilt, okay? But it can also be helpful for people whose glutes are clenched all day. Now, it's not appropriate if you feel that this puts a lot of pressure into your pelvic floor. If you feel that, you likely need to work with a pelvic floor physio, and that kind of thing is perhaps threatening. Certainly anyone who has prolapse shouldn't be doing that if it feels like it adds pressure. So, squat breathing like this can really be helpful to relax the low back. The position of the feet might help you if you have, for example, if you want to spread the sits bones a bit, widen the feet and see if that helps you bring length to your glutes and you feel a bit better. But for the low back, breath work is best done with your feet together and this kind of closed up, rounded position. And I want you to breathe that way before you then try the pole squat from program 1. And yes, indeed, if you're not happy with your goblet squat or your cyclist squat or whatever, you may be better off going back and digging up pole squatting from program 1. Because what this allows you to do is do assisted descent, okay, into a low squat. Take a breath, and then as you exhale, actually rise up. Don't pull yourself up, but use your strength from a low position to come up out of the squat. And you will feel your glutes get involved. So the breath work and the rolling precedes this. Guided descent, breathe in, and as you exhale, okay? See if you can't significantly increase the recruitment of your glutes. And then the last thing I'm going to teach you in this long video is to use the hip hinge to bring length to those glutes as well. If you're in an anterior tilt, you're someone who probably hinges with a lot of your hamstrings but less of your glutes. And if you're in a posterior tilt, well, there, my friends, you might be hinging with your low back and not actually getting much of either your hamstrings and your glutes, and you may be threatening your low back. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to kneel on a soft surface, find a cushion. Your feet can be tucked under, but sometimes people feel more comfortable with their feet like this. It helps with the knees. Feel more comfortable in a kneeling position. You want to squeeze and release your glutes, okay? Don't squish your glutes. This shouldn't cause your knees or your glutes to tense. You want to bring relaxation. Then place your long finger on your upper pelvic bones, the ASIS, and your thumbs on the lower rib cage. This distance needs to be preserved as you do the movement, which is sitting back into a hinge, flexing at the hip, spreading the sit bones, lengthening the glutes, okay? Really feel that opening up, and then squeeze and come back up. Driving that motion through your contraction of the glutes, but feeling and appreciating that length that comes from being able to hinge correctly. Sometimes when we're so busy trying to do it on our feet, just removing the knees from the equation helps isolate hip flexion and helps us to focus on good glute length. And recall from my discussion of the ankles, it's the same at the hips. For your hips to release, to trust, to be able to move, they have to be able to be strong. So eccentric loading, meaning loading a muscle when it's lengthening like this, is the best way to improve that control through that range of motion and restore good hip mobility. I failed to suggest that you would roll the front of your legs in your hip flexors, but that should have been included as well, and my apologies. But rolling the hip flexors and quads is also demonstrated in your app under the posture and mobility section in the lower cross syndrome. So just know that the rolling is there too. So rolling the front and the glutes, okay? And then practicing. Now my friends in a posterior tilt will notice that this area wants to close. That means your back is rounding in the hinge. And anterior tilt people will use, their hamstrings will get really tight and they'll feel it in their hamstrings, but they'll also really jack their back and they'll feel that this area in the front is spreading too much in the hinge. So getting a good hinge is actually complementing your squat, but you may have to pull back and just do this. So if you're someone who's really tight back there, you have piriformis syndrome or sciatica even, see if you can't really help yourself by rolling those hip flexors, and maybe not, you don't want to roll an angry glute right now, but lengthening that glute under load might be amazing for you. So I think that's all I want to talk about for now. See if those things are helpful, and feel free to send me videos of your squat so that I can then give you some feedback.